Hey there, I'm Neil. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the host and producer of Pause and Rewind, the podcast that chats to changemakers, thought leaders and role models who all share a common goal. They're striving to make the world a more inclusive place. And, let's face it, we need it. Each guest has a unique story when it comes to doing their thing, and we often know who people are in the now, but how much do we really know about them? Pause and Rewind takes a moment to explore the experiences, realisations and relationships in my guest's life that led them to where and who they are now, because everyone loves an origin story. We'll dive into tales, anecdotes and a little of what makes our guest tick. So whether you're here for insights or inspo or simply want to know about your heroes, this podcast is for you. You might never know someone's story, but if you pay attention, you'll hear it, you'll see it and you'll feel it. So, are you ready to pause and rewind? Hey there and welcome to this episode of Pause and Rewind. During this conversation, I am chatting to the wonderful Stephanie Lynnette. Stephanie is the events manager for London Trans Pride, the largest of its kind, which this year saw an incredible groundbreaking over 100,000 attendees, which was amazing. It was such a vibe. London Trans Pride, as I share in this conversation, is one of my favourite Pride events. I think it goes back to grassroots. I think it's not corporate, it's activisty, and it's so powerful. And Stephanie is one of the driving forces behind that. I actually met Stephanie a couple of years ago when Stephanie was working at Queer Britain. Stephanie has a background in events. She is a content creator, an activist, but also Stephanie is now branched into trans healthcare, a new direction for her, which we talk about here. I get to see Steph out and about, like so many people on this podcast, during so many different events, from Pride events and other things. But it was actually wonderful to sit down and have this conversation with her and get to know Stephanie a bit more and her origin story. I'm not even lying when I say Stephanie was absolutely on fire during this conversation. She is so articulate, so sharp, and just has this brilliant way of communicating. And we dug deep into where that comes from, where the confidence comes from, and where the polished Stephanie that we often see online comes from. Really interesting element of the conversation. We dive into loads during this conversation about Stephanie's transition and kind of like reaching a point of pride with her transness and how that shows up now in the Stephanie that we know and love. There's so much in this conversation. Please do take care of yourself whilst listening. We do cover some sensitive and challenging topics around sexual and physical assault, mental health and more. But yeah, here's the conversation. Let me know what you think. Enjoy. Hey there, Stephanie. Welcome to Pause and Rewind. It's so good to see you and have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to see you too.
It's always lovely to see you. I love it when we get to bump into each other out and about at various events, but very rarely do we get to sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, we always bump into each other like in the wild, but it's very rarely that we find that we can carve out time in our busy schedules.
Super busy, and you always it's always at Pride events and you're always looking fab.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm not looking quite as polished today, but yeah, I'm usually a pink blur.
You look gorgeous. I'm going to start with the question that I ask every guest, and that is, what does the world look like for Stephanie Lynnette right now?
Varied, just busy and varied. Lots going on, lots of changes within the community, lots of work to be done, lots of work that's going on. So yeah, just very varied.
Very, very. And you have recently, I know that you're still in events in terms of your role with London Trans Pride. It's in my top 2 Pride events. Like it's joint first with UK Black Pride. The two of them, I don't think in terms of what you can get out of a Pride, you can get anywhere else. And I've not been to every Pride, so I say that with kind of like a big confidence, but those two are pinnacle for me in terms of Pride events. I know we're going to talk about that, but the shift from events into trans healthcare, that's exciting. Tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, do you know, it came out of circumstance. It wasn't something that I was planning on, And as a trans woman, I had gone through, 10 years of transition through children's services, adult services, most GICs, types of comportment, things like that. And during that process, during that 10-year process, I had never met another trans person working within trans healthcare. And so when the opportunity was presented to me to go and shape the holistic healthcare offering at the UK's leading gender affirming surgery clinic, it just presented itself as a real opportunity to fill that gap that was very felt for me for, within my transition. But yeah, it's very different going from opening museums and running events to, ward rounds and visits and one-to-one support and training.
But I imagine that so much of the customer service element of the events and understanding people's needs
Yeah.
and that spirit of collaboration really does come into it on top of your own personal lived experience of having been through that.
Yeah.
You're a
No.
patient champion, peer support worker. Tell me about those roles. What are you most enjoying? What have you found challenging?
So I'll start with patient champion. It's the one with like a fabulous title, but I think lots of people don't understand what it means. So a patient champion is very much in terms of patient advocacy at a kind of broader trust level. That's going out and doing kind of work with external to the very London-centric, gender-affirming, healthcare pathways. That's going and training groups of junior doctors to make sure that they know what, how to be trans inclusive and how to be, gender expansive with their linguistics and why, really basic things like including your pronouns are so important. And I think that it's it's kind of misunderstood as a kind of section, but essentially it really is advocating for my patients and advocating for trans people within the NHS at various levels, but specifically at kind of a trust-wide level, and then above that, kind of an external nationwide level. So yeah, that's what patient champion is essentially in a nutshell. And then as a peer support worker, it's really they'll be called different things in different places. You'll see them as lived experience practitioners, or you'll see them as peer support experts, or but a peer support worker is someone who works one-on-one or in group sessions with our service users. And obviously my service users are going through their gender affirming surgery pathway. So I'm there at like a very kind of pinnacle time in their transition. And we're there to help support them with everything from, recovery to the social and political climate that's happening and to, many other things. But it really is, an incredibly rewarding thing to somewhat hold people's hand during their recovery from a lived experience perspective.
Yeah. And when you think about your own experience and stuff, how much do you wish that those roles had existed during your 10-year process?
So obviously your listeners won't know, but I can tell them. So I started my transition when I was 12 years old. And it was really challenging for me because I went through children's services, through adolescent services, through adult services. I kind of explored every avenue of the available kind of gender affirming pathway. And the fact that I interacted with no trans people, I think really cemented for me the idea that trans people often feel that they aren't represented or they don't belong within healthcare generally. And so I think for me, for young Steph, it would have been so lovely to have interacted with trans people who'd come out the other end from that kind of perspective, but also even just to meet and interact with other trans people. I'm from small town Cornwall. I had never met another trans person until I went to, my first Truro Pride when I was about 16. And so starting my transition at 12, that's 4 years where I wasn't really interacting with other trans women my age or people going through that journey. I was interacting with queer people, but not necessarily trans women. And so for me, I think it would have made a world of difference to my transition just to have the support from someone who's really been there and seen it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, thank goodness that you are working with an incredible trust, an
Yes.
incredible leading trans healthcare organisation, doing this work. And of course, the Steph that we know and love is not just limited to your professional output as well. You've got you've got your volunteering, the role with London Trans Pride. You've also got the content creation where you share your lived experience. You also share your lived expertise in that as well. And there's a lot going on. And how do you balance all of that stuff? And I know that we joked very quickly before we came on about the joys of ADHD, but
Mhm.
how do you balance it all? What does self-care look like for you?
Do you know, for me, it's very much come to the point of something always has to give. And so for me, that comes into that very pragmatic point of view of being able to appropriately prioritize those
Mm,
tasks. So I love my content creation, but when things amp up at Trans Pride, it falls off the list, and that's okay. You know, you don't have to be ever present in every avenue that you're doing. You know, you can't be trustee at X, Y, and Z and then also be facilitating your full-time job all the time. There are
yeah.
times where you have to accept your own limitations as a person. And I think as a trans woman, that has been a really kind of valuable lesson for me. Self-care for me is quite boring, but it comes from my mother, who was a nurse, and it's very much the idea of when you have the opportunity to rest, rest. When you have the opportunity to sit, sit. When you have the opportunity to sleep, sleep. You know, it's very much leaning into the fact that nothing in your day is guaranteed. At the drop of a hat, it could all completely change. And so when you have your weekends, take your weekends. And when you have your breaks, take your breaks. And if you need to prioritize things within your life to allow you more bandwidth and capacity to deal with other things, then that's okay. And trying not to hold yourself to those impossibly high standards of, well, I have to get 2 videos out this week and I have to do my, clinical hours at my job. And then I also have to go and do all of my voluntary work. You know, it's allowing things to slip in a measured and considered way.
For sure, for sure. I take that on board, something that I need to tell myself all the time. And I often say, I actually really like those rare moments that I get bored because
Just on your own.
let
Yeah.
me get bored. Let me, like, because I don't get bored. Like my brain is working, 72 miles an hour, if not faster,
Mhm.
all the time. And it's quite a challenge to sometimes stop and allow myself those moments. And the content is so varied as well. Like there's not many topics that you don't cover. Uh,
No.
Sex, your
Mhm.
transition, you covered your stroke that you experienced last year. You lay it all out there. What does, if you don't mind me asking, what does holding back look like? Like, do you believe in holding back? Is there some things that you think, I'm going to keep this part of me for myself? Where do you draw the line? I had a great conversation with Jamie Windust actually a few years ago, where we were chatting about brands. It was a talk about brands for non-binary People's Day, and how much of yourself, your identity, do you put into your professional output, or do you hold
Mm.
back? Where's the line for you?
Do you know, I think it's so interesting because I see them as such separate entities. Obviously, my channel and my content creation, on YouTube is very specifically an extension of me and my personality and my lived experience.
And
And so,
it shines through, like it's
thank
you.
you.
It's the you that I see out and about.
Yeah, it's very much an extension of that. And so, for me on YouTube, there were really kind of no holds barred. But then also, I think what's really interesting, and I think that no one really cottons on to this until I tell them, but by covering topics that seem to other people to be so taboo or so outside of the ordinary, it actually massively safeguards myself from not sharing about things that I don't want to. So people make the assumption that because I will talk about my vagina on the internet or my stroke on the internet or my family dynamics on the internet that I'm open about everything. And so what you'll find is people actually often won't come to you with open-ended
Mm,
questions because they just assume that you're going to be open about it.
yeah,
So by experimenting with that level of openness, it actually kind of safeguards me from a lot of really awkward conversations.
that's that.
Yeah.
That's so savvy. That's so savvy. And I often think when what people don't know about me is that they see this really loud person like online and at events and stuff. But actually, I'm quite quiet and I can be quite boring and tame a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I'm a very risk averse person as well.
Yeah. No, I'm exactly the same, and I think this is the thing, we've kind of got these very, I would call them, this is just my background in events, but I would call them customer facing personas. But then when we're actually, on our own, don't get me wrong, there's a certain level of desensitization. I work within gender affirming services, I work within trans events. Like, I'm very desensitized to talking about certain very intimate things. But when I'm on my own, I'm really boring. I'm a gamer, I'm a collector of things. I'm not, the person that I always am when I'm being customer facing.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. You are making a move into body positivity and inclusion
Oh.
around that, which is really exciting. When was the shift in that? What kind of prompted it, and what can people expect to see?
Do you know, I'm really glad you kind of asked about this. So, over the last few years, so after my gender affirming surgery in 2020, I gained a really considerable amount of weight. And the thing is, I've always been, I'm 6'4", I'm a very large human. And so my whole life, I had been holding myself to these really impossibly high standards of essentially trying to be a petite woman, and my frame not really matching with that. And I think that, when I talk about body positivity, I don't talk about it in terms of like normalizing certain, unhealthy habits and things like that. I think I see it more as like a body neutrality thing. Whereas even if I, went back and lost all of the weight that I gained, and forced myself down that path, which is something I've considered doing, many times, it will never make me a petite woman. It will never make me under 6 foot tall. It will never shrink my feet. It will never, And so I think my move towards body positivity was really coming towards finding comfort in taking up more space. As a very tall person, as a plus size person, I probably take up more than twice a regular size human's space. And there's a lot of power in doing that. There's a lot of power in being like, I physically take up more space. And as someone from a marginalized community, from the trans community, as a trans woman, like, I love the idea of physically taking up more space and really kind of sitting within that power. I describe myself as may contain trans fats as a bit of a like tongue-in-cheek way to really kind of build on the fact that I am a plus size trans woman. But my move towards body positivity is really coming from a point where, trans inclusion is not always inclusive, and I don't mean this to sound glib or in any way offensive, but we need to move towards a society where diversity within trans women's bodies is not the size of your breast implants. Like, that's not the diversity. We need to stop seeing the same, body profiles being kind of platformed, because essentially a lot of and it's not just about being plus size, but other access needs, or individuals who use ambulatory aids, or I don't understand why it's to be palatably passing is to be successfully trans within our society. But I'm successfully trans within our society, and I'm, plus size, and I'm very tall. And yeah, so I think that my move towards, and I don't know what it looks like at the moment, I'm going to be changing some of my handles. I'm going to be changing my approach to certain things. My background's in fashion design before I got into events, so maybe I'll go into something a bit more like that. But yeah, I am, I'm supersized Steph. That's how I feel. That's who I am. I think there's a lot of power in that. And I just wanted to make more of a conscious decision to really start embracing and enjoying that part of my life.
And there's so much there that you've just said that gave me goosebumps. It's so exciting. I love that idea of, I physically take up space, and you know what? I
Yeah.
can't fucking help it.
Yeah.
This is who I am. So you're going to accept that.
Yeah. Even if I halved my weight, I would still take up more space because I'm just a bigger person.
Yeah.
And I think the really lovely thing is trans women have come to me and said, the things I'm insecure about, having large feet or being really tall, are things that I see you are not insecure about. And I was like, it's not that I'm not insecure about it. It's that I've learned to accept that hating my height isn't going to make me shorter, and hating my waist size isn't going to make me thinner. And, really moving away from the idea that you have to shrink yourself in order to fit into society. And I'm just over it. I'm so over it.
So yeah, so you should be. And this idea of being palatable spans across so much, right? It spans
Yeah.
across queerness, transness, blackness,
Yeah.
There's this idea of being palatable, and the opposite of that is being too much, and
Yeah.
never really fitting into the standards of heteronormativity, patriarchy, whiteness, that
Hmm.
people and prettiness and all of that bullshit that we all that many of us from marginalized communities feel pushed towards.
Yeah, definitely. It's just, and I think, it's a really important thing to touch on the intersectionality of that, because within all communities, to be palatable is to be successful. You'll see in racially diverse communities, to be lighter skinned and close to Caucasian is more palatably acceptable. You're more likely to succeed. To be thinner, you're more likely to succeed. To be pretty, you're more likely to succeed. To be able bodied, you're more likely to succeed. And I'm just, the world is made up of such beautiful diversity, but I'm tired of seeing that palatability being the only thing that's being platformed. And there's obviously a huge amount of irony in the fact that, I am to some extent, a cis passing trans woman, but I've really kind of in the last 5 years pushed against that and moved towards queer spaces and opened myself up on my channel and kind of, it's so important to me to have embraced this element of my identity that for so long I was really pushing against, because I was trying so hard just to be palatable.
Yeah, yeah. It's the palatability, it's the palatability, it's the assimilation, it's the
Hmm.
forcing ourselves to fit in, and actually we
Hmm.
just don't have to.
And also, we just don't, and that's okay. It's okay to just not fit in.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
Yeah,
But you'll fit in where you belong.
yeah,
That's the most
just a
important
bit.
thing. And thankfully, I think you've carved your space in communities where you belong, and it's so beautiful to see. We met a good few years ago at Queer Britain,
Yes,
and
we
it is
do.
wonderful to see you excelling there, excelling what you're doing now, and can't wait to see what's next for you. I'm so excited to dive into your origin story and find out about little Steph.
Oh
So,
my God.
with that, are you ready to pause and rewind?
I'm ready to pause and rewind.
Here we go. Take me back. Tell me all about little Stephanie.
So little Stephanie came onto the scene. Feelings of kind of a mismatch in my gender identity were present throughout most of my childhood. But little Stephanie first came onto the scene while I was having one-to-one counselling support during my first year of secondary school, so from the age of 11. And we were going through, and they were kind of ironing out for me different ways of describing what they assumed at the time was kind of sexual identity, but then turned out to be gender identity, which a lot of kind of trans children go down a similar path. They assume we're going to be, queer, and then we end up being, queer and. But that was kind of the start for me of going through my school's support services of counselling. And then as soon as the idea of gender diversity came onto the scene, and we kind of discussed the ideas of gender dysphoria and people who had transitioned, and that being a kind of, because I had always gravitated towards the feminine, and so as soon as I had the vocabulary to articulate that, and as soon as that was kind of not presented to me, but all of the information was handed down to me in a way that I could perceive it as a child, I then suddenly started to kind of connect everything together. And then 12-year-old me became 12-year-old Stephanie the day before my 13th birthday. And then I transitioned through secondary school in rural Cornwall from year 8 through to, so started secondary school as a kind of male student and then left as Stephanie. My prom was very much a swan song sort of moment, but yeah, really interesting to have transitioned during such like formative adolescent years as your secondary education.
And we all know that secondary school can be pretty tough for many of us queer kids, right? What was it
Mhm.
like going through that transition in front of peers? And were they people that you'd grown up with throughout your life?
Yeah, there was really no escaping from it because they were people who had known me since I was a
Right.
child, and obviously I had demonstrated, very effeminate behaviours from such a young age. And so I don't think anyone was shocked. But I started secondary school, as my male version of myself. And I often refer to him as a little brother. He feels like a relation of me, but not like an extension of me to some extent. And I also use he, him pronouns to talk about my pre-transition self because he just feels like such a separate entity. So he was very much kind of his community was projecting onto him that he was homosexual from the age of like 9.
Yeah.
And I think that lots of young queer kids can relate to adults projecting their ideas of sexual identity on them from such a young age.
Way before we get there.
Before we have the vocabulary to deal with it, before we know what we like, you know. And so, yeah, it was really interesting to have gone from the assumption that I was a homosexual, you know, young lad to being a trans woman. And there was no escaping it. I just had to really meet it head on, because, you know, school is a hard time for the most quote unquote normal, the most palatable of people. And so for anyone who sits outside of that palatability or outside of the social norms, you really do kind of have to just either shrink like a wallflower or bloom straight through. And I refused to be a wallflower, so I just bloomed straight through.
What were you thinking about the world at that time? Kind of, you know, never mind other people's reactions or anything. I don't care about that. How did you feel at that time? Quite a young age, but obviously with the fortitude and the resilience to say, no, this is me and I'm going to bloom. How did you feel about the world?
I think a lot of it was stubbornness. I think it obviously everyone always, it comes across as like, oh, you're so brave. But secretly, I think I was just a preteen, like a really stubborn preteen. It was like, no, this is what I want, and I don't care about your opinions. And you know, and that made it into everything, like huge things from my gender identity into little things like what shade of foundation I was wearing. Like, no, this is my shade. I don't know what you're talking about. So I think that part of it was just me being a stubborn preteen and being like, no, this is. But also at that time, you know, when young people go through gender identity services, they're constantly questioned at every avenue to make sure that this is what they want to do, that they understand the ramifications of these really serious decisions. And so I think at the time I was being influenced by so many external, you know, it was a confluence of external influence that was really presenting itself to me of, are you sure? Do you know what you want? You know, how do you? And so I think I just decided to stop taking on anyone's expectations and just power through. So my world became very Stephanie-centric. It became very, what's best for me? It became very, you know, how do I do this for myself? Because it's clear that the adults around me, that my peers around me, that the, you know, medical team around me are very doubtful of my intentions. So I have to hit the ground running 110% to prove to them that this is what I wanted. And so I just made a very conscious decision that every day I was going to be Stephanie 110%.
Honestly, it's giving me chills thinking about it. And I'd love to know what you think about the rhetoric now, you know, in 2025, all these years later, this whole kids don't know themselves, kids can't be 100% sure. How does that rhetoric make you feel as someone that fucking knew?
You know, it's so interesting to ever be asked this, because as a healthcare professional, you have to approach it with empathy for the parents, and you understand that, like, you can see both sides of the argument in terms of wanting to safeguard children's innocence and things like that. But safeguarding children's innocence shouldn't come at the cost of anticipating and projecting onto them your own capacity to accept change. And I think this is the thing that is really unacceptable to me, is that parents are projecting their own insecurities onto their children's gender identity, wherein actually, if they were to accept what their child was exploring, it would preserve their innocence for much longer. And for me, you know, there was always questions. There was always, you know, do you want to sacrifice your fertility at 13? Do you want to pursue this avenue? Do you want to become somewhat of a social outcast within your peer group, you know? And so I think that those questions are necessary. But I think that what's really challenging, and I've said it many times, is the argument, you know, well, what about the children, is only ever utilised by adults who want to disguise their own prejudices behind the innocence of children. And they want to platform that as their main concern, as a way to vocalise their prejudice in as kind of a palatable way for people to hear it. When in actuality, the innocence of children means that they're much more, you know, comfortable and accepting of change within society and exploration within identity outside of gender identity, that it's not until people start projecting onto them that they start formulating their very kind of rigid ideas of who they're, quote unquote, supposed to be. So, yeah, for me, I always knew, and I was always okay with the questions because I knew that they had to be asked.
Yeah.
But considering the current, rhetoric that's going on in the United Kingdom, it was much easier to transition then. Obviously, trans kids have it god awful now, so I'm obviously very privileged to have been going through a time where I could get access to hormones and I could get access to blockers. But I just wish that adults would stop projecting their own experiences onto children and just let children exist within the grey area that is exploration of identity.
Yeah. We see those projections and those insecurities with queer kids generally. We see them with other marginalized groups as well, that fear. And we see it at such a level that it really inhibits any freedom, and it does. It destroys innocence and self-expression and such. What were you like at school then? This determination to bloom, whether out of stubbornness or bravery, this determination to bloom. What was the school experience like?
It was a nightmare. I fit so far outside of the administration's expectations of what a child should be. And I think I really enjoyed challenging everyone at every turn, challenging their perceptions of how to care for a child. And don't get me wrong, all of that came from a place of being oppressed and a place of being, of experiencing discrimination as a kind of young trans woman. But I was very badly behaved. I was very much a troublemaker. I was very much an attention seeker. I think I still am to some extent. But yeah, my extensions were long, my hems were short, I was smoking out by the bins, I was flirting with all the boys, I was getting into trouble all the time because I refused to live within the experience of being like a meek, kind of quiet. And there were times when I was quite popular. There was I remember a specific time where I had recently come out, and because I was so different, that was quite a popular thing amongst my peers. But then as they kind of got older into their more kind of, I feel like dating years of secondary school, that kind of year 9, 10 and 11, I then became kind of more of a social outcast. But yeah, I challenged every decision, every perception of me. I did that very classic thing where you leverage your marginalization to kind of really stir up trouble. And I think that I'm very glad that I had that experience in school so that it wasn't something I took forward into my adult life. But yeah, I was artistic, attention seeking, and trouble. I was trouble.
We've got your 3 words for your origin story. What did support and love feel and look like at the time?
So my relationship with my family, went through various different degrees of being quite strained. And I also started my transition whilst my older sister was in the same secondary school as me. Okay. So she was experiencing that as like a second-hand sort of thing. And so my experience of love at that time was very fragile and very strained. And I think a lot of the kind of attention-seeking behaviour that I exhibited, and obviously now I have the gift of hindsight to look back on that, but I think it was because I wasn't getting the love and attention that I needed, maybe at home or in my personal life or the support in terms of that. And so I was seeking it through quite negative approaches within my kind of peer group at school. But support for me really looked like and I can never kind of understate enough how much the school support services really helped me. The student support services and CAMS, which is obviously young person's counselling, and that was really my support network. It was my counselors and my student support service coordinators and individuals from CAMS who would come in and speak to me, once a week. Or so my support was a really structured form of support from kind of professionals and psychologists and staff members. And so it meant that I matured quite quickly, because my core support network wasn't coming from my peers necessarily. It was coming from my my administration. So yeah, it was probably a very alienating experience. I think a lot of people probably can't relate to it, because I had friends, but all of my friendships were very strained by my identity, and when who I was in terms of being a trans woman kind of fell, I used the term like out of vogue. As soon as it became unfashionable to be friends with a trans person, I would often be dropped by certain friendship groups. And so the only constant kind of string of support I had was from kind of professionals within the administration sector.
Yeah. And again, that I hazard about that experience probably really shapes how you are showing up now in this new role of kind of like being one of those professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really thought about it like that, actually. I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I guess because my experience of professional support was really my foundation of like that common thread of support during my formative years of my transition, I guess that is probably playing a role in why I'm, moving towards and kind of flourishing within roles that are specifically working to support trans individuals.
Definitely what you needed. When did that little troublemaker, when did you put that to one side, and when did that shift a little bit?
It had to one side when I went to college.
Yeah.
And I think that, so just for kind of clarity, so I transitioned and went to school in a really god awful town in Cornwall called St Austell.
Okay.
And then I went to college in Plymouth, which is in Devon. So I went to college. I got an hour and a half train to college every day. I wanted to go as far away as I possibly could. So as soon as I turned 16, I had the opportunity not only to reinvent myself, but also the anonymity that comes from people not knowing me from adolescence. There was no one in my college who had gone to my school. It was the next county over, so no one knew me colloquially. And obviously that comes with like an immense pressure of like, oh, what if people kind of find me out, But the other thing that comes with is, I didn't have to be so abrasive. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to exist with the weight of other people's expectations of me, of teachers thinking I would change my mind, of my sister thinking that I was a nuisance to her kind of school. It was the first time that I got to exist outside of the pressures of other people's projections on my gender identity, my transition. And so troublemaker Stephanie really took a seat at 16. And then, artistic Stephanie and hypersensitive Stephanie and the very empathetic version of myself that had been buried for a really long time, she really came out and she flourished at arts college, studying what she wanted to do.
So what did you do at arts college?
I studied fashion design and marketing.
Fashion design marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And with that shift from other people's expectations, the anonymity, was there a sense of freedom in how you felt?
Yeah, it was that train journey to and from college every day felt like the transformation scene in The Devil's Wears Prada when she's walking through New York to Suddenly I See. It felt every day like I was stepping away from other people's expectations of me into my own carved out identity, and every day felt like an opportunity to really find myself in a way that I hadn't, because when you're projecting a version of yourself, you're really as far away from your true identity as you will ever be. And so going to art college, that journey there every day, it came with an inherent amount of freedom, but also it came with an inherent amount of shame. There was a lot of me that was hiding my identity or hiding my family dynamic, or, changing parts of me, not just in my appearance, but in how I held myself and projected, those things. So it came with freedom, it came with shame, but it also it came at exactly the right time for me to step away from having unguided anger. I think a lot of trans people, at London Trans Pride, we say with love and rage. And I think a lot of people have unfocused rage from being suppressed and oppressed as trans people. And so it really allowed me to park my rage that I had felt towards my peer group and just explore Stephanie.
Yeah, yeah. And those things can exist. Those things can sit alongside each
They
other.
can sit alongside each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, for sure. How do you feel about, you talked about your hometown as god awful. I have a really complicated relationship with my hometown. Thinking about it, it's not that complicated. It's also god awful, and I hate going back there. And my dad is still there.
Mhm.
Not much takes me back there because I always see my dad elsewhere. So,
Mm.
how do you feel now about your hometown and maybe your home environment, really, in the sense of you are flourishing, you're out there thriving as a trans woman, as a human. How do you
Mm.
feel about the past now?
Do you know, I was reflecting on this recently with a service user of mine, talking about kind of my relationship to where I was from. And I really, I approach it from a sense of admiration for young Stephanie, because as present day Stephanie, I do not think I would have the tools and the tenacity to thrive in that environment again. I think that it was very of its time, and I give credit where credit is due to young Stephanie, because I couldn't do that now. My relationship to home is strained, and I think that, as someone who's described their own kind of hometown as god awful, I think there's also this huge sense of a lack of belonging, because when you don't feel like where you're from is home, then it's where is home and where do you find home? And for me, and I know for you as well, we found that feeling of home within community, as opposed to being tethered to a physical space, which most people associate with home. We find home in action, in community, in friendships, in protest. And so my relationship to home is very much now admiration for my young self. But when I think of home now, I just think, yeah, that's a place I don't belong.
Yeah,
And that's it. And that's kind of, my emotion behind it is no longer as fragile or as tangible as it once was. But I just don't really think of it anymore. I just think, yeah, that's a place I was at once, and I probably will never be again.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or as limited as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Talk to me about early career. Fashion, and marketing.
Mhm.
What did her early career look like?
Well, early career for a lot of people who work within fashion and marketing is retail. So my career beginnings were very much happening in retail. And I pursued, I think that is something I've spoken about on my channel, but I pursued fashion design and marketing at a bachelor's level, and that's kind of when I made the move to London. And I actually dropped out with my bachelor's degree when I was outed at university. And that sense of identity and freedom that I had was kind of ripped away from me. So I had work within kind of retail organizations, and then I had internships with, Peter Jensen, and I did a Vivienne Westwood kind of fashion week show when I was a student, and I went and worked for a couple of brands, and but after and I also worked with a Lego company for a little while, which was always super fun, alongside my degree. But yeah, when I dropped out of my degree, and I come from the type of socioeconomic background that means that when you lose financial aid, you lose your avenue to higher education, because it's just not something that is possible to explore in kind of any other way. So I just immediately started working within retail again, in a full-time capacity. I worked at Oliver Bonus. For those of your listeners who don't know, Oliver Bonus is like a shitter version of John Lewis. Um,
Not a
but
fan.
sorry. Oh, yeah, no love lost. And then from there, I really wanted to find a way to carve myself out a path in staying within the arts, because I really missed the arts. I missed the influence that studying within the arts afforded me, and it kind of creatively fulfilled me. And so I segued myself from working in the poor person's strong limits into working within the Tate galleries. So I joined the Tate galleries and I became their youngest ever retail team manager when I was about 20. And then that's how I got started within the arts. I went and I worked my way up from a retail operation, and then I moved into visitor experience operations, and I've worked it. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, but the Tate Galleries, the Science Museum, Shakespeare's Globe, Buckingham Palace, I really run the gambit of kind of collecting all of the Pokemon of the heritage world in London. And then that obviously led me to where we met, which was Queer Britain. But obviously I've just skipped over a lot of.
Yeah, I mean that is a whistle stop tour, and I know that your career for someone so young is so expansive now, especially you're adding like another kind of like really unique
Whole
thing to
different
it now.
layer.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
whole different layer. But through all of it, there is a sense of there's a lot of community focus there in terms of that customer facing, as you've called it, visitor experience, help supporting people's needs. And I wonder what was the first step that you found your way into the world of, say, advocacy, but also inclusion, because you are someone that champions diversity, inclusion, belonging. What was that? Was there a definitive moment that you think this is where I want to be?
Do it's so interesting, and I'd love for anyone who's listening to this to kind of take away this lesson, but I wasn't always a champion of inclusion and belonging and self-acceptance. I, like many queer people, went through a phase of shrinking myself, of coming back to what we said, making myself more palatable, of parking my trans identity, of just kind of buckling down, and from the age of 18 to 21, those kind of 3 years, I had associated being trans with only ever being a negative thing. It was the reason I dropped out of university. It was the reason that I didn't have relationships with certain family members. It was the reason that certain things in my life had maybe not panned out, and my connotation to it was so negative. That I really wanted to park it as part of my experience, and the people who I worked with at Oliver Bonus never knew. And it wasn't until I started working within the arts and I started to fulfill myself again more creatively working at the Tate Galleries that I found not only people who were more open with their queerness, but people who didn't see my gender identity as a detriment, but actually saw it as an attribute. And that was really where I started to, and it was very slow goings at first. It was a really challenging time to kind of try and find some semblance to being accepting of something I had really hated for such a I hated being trans. I wanted to finish my transition, live a cis normative life, but being outed has this way of ripping you apart from your safety and security of the anonymity that you've built for yourself. And through being ripped away from that, I found my pathway to trans support groups to help me through that time. I found my way, through going and working with charities or just attending Pride events again, because I hadn't really been part of those things for a long time. And I still wasn't to the point where I was comfortable enough to do it in London because that's where everyone knew me, but I was going to, Manchester and Birmingham and going and exploring prides elsewhere at that sort of time. So yeah, for everyone that's listening, it's okay to be in that phase of your journey where there is still shame, and a lot of queer people do feel that associated with shame, and it's a long journey to come to terms with the time that you may have wasted feeling shame. But it's also part of the driving force that as soon as you get to a point in your life where you realize that there's been so much shame, you're so motivated to never revert back to that it just propels you forward into an entirely different state of existence.
So important to hear that for anyone that a journey is a journey, right? And we all get to it different places, but it's just never too late to reach that level of self-acceptance.
Yeah.
And it takes work.
It takes, I think this is the other thing. And it's the way I describe it is I also describe this as like having confidence as a plus size woman. Confidence is not an emotion, it is a choice. You have to choose to live in spite of other people's expectations every day. And it's the same thing with coming to terms with your gender identity, coming to terms with your queerness, coming to terms with your disability, the color of your skin, you know, anything. You have to wake up every day and say, I exist outside of the social norms, and I'm going to choose to do that boldly, or I'm going to choose to do that loudly, or I'm going to choose to do that empathetically or supportively. You know, it's really a choice that you make every day. And if you're not in the position right now where you feel that you have the capacity to make that choice, that's okay. Because one day, a day will come where your capacity changes and you think, I'm finally ready to exist in spite of other people's expectations.
Everything that's coming out of your mouth is literally fire. Like you are like, it's boom, 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 and it's beautiful to hear, and it's thought provoking, and it's giving me goosebumps. And I wonder, where does that come from, Steph? Where does this Steph that we know now, like that confidence, you know, confidence is not an emotion, it's a choice. The self-awareness, the being able to express the way you do, not just in terms of your physicality and how you show up in the world, and you can see the fashion, right? I can see the fashion side of you. You're always like churning out looks and stuff. But where does this come from?
I think the polish, the kind of, because the way I describe it is when I present my arguments or I present facts or I present support, it's always very polished, that it's not very messy, that it's always very considered.
Mm.
And I think honestly, it comes from that adolescent point of insecurity where I had to be Stephanie
Right.
110% because otherwise people would doubt me. And so I think that I really absorbed that into my everyday life. And I was like, people will listen to me more if I present myself with assurance and
Yeah.
confidence. But things like my voice, you know, I had so I think people often think that I'm from a very different social class than I'm from, but I had elocution lessons as a teenager because I had seen on several occasions, you know, when I was visiting London for my appointments, that my parents were slightly taken less seriously because they had kind of thicker Cornish accents. And I was like, well, I don't want that. And I want people to take me, you know, I wanted to sound like someone who had an education that I would never experience as a result of kind of where I came from. And so, you know, my voice is very clear because I had elocution, and my assurance is very sharp because it comes from a place of insecurity. So I very much molded, you know, Stephanie, the kind of
Yeah.
public facing Stephanie, as someone who is not to be messed with by being really polished.
Yeah.
Because I think that these arguments against the trans community of like trans people aren't successful or trans people are messy or our community has a lot of, you know, infighting and things like this, people find it very difficult to put those arguments to someone who is my age, had the career that I had, and present myself in the way that I do.
Yeah. Do you let polished Stephanie take a back seat, and do you allow yourself to be maybe a little bit unpolished, soft, messy even? Like, what do those moments look and feel like? Do they feel like a relief? I'm so curious.
Do you know, it's so interesting. I'm so someone I have been seeing recently, kind of romantically, were talking to me. They were kind of discussing how I'm not very YouTube Stephanie in my everyday,
Okay.
like, and they found it really interesting. They were like, even the way that you talk, you know, and they get quite freaked out when I do my like, hello lovelies, my name is Stephanie Lynnette and welcome back to my channel. Like they get really like, oh, that's a bit dark sided, you know. And so it's, I think that I do let her take a back seat, but she is very much like, she's an extension of me, but she is a very much a protective mask to kind of to help me through the trials and tribulations of just existing as a person, let alone a marginalized person. But yeah, I let her go quite often. And I think that anyone who saw me at London Trans Pride 2025, when I was on the stage doing a mic check and I was screaming out to the crowd and I was swearing a bit, like that is a lot more of me because she's a lot less polished and she's a
Yeah.
lot more in the moment. And but
I guess you're in a safe space there, right? Because you're in a
exactly.
space of love where you belong.
But this is the thing. So people think, you know, people have often kind of said on the internet you can come across a bit of fake, and it's like, well, the internet is a very scary place, but trans pride is not.
Right.
Trans pride is the ultimate safe space. You know, every year the team deliver the ultimate safe space for people to come and be themselves. And so, you know, I will show up in pink and in my body positive, and I'll be yelling, and you know, and then on YouTube I will be quite polished, and I'll be sharing these really kind of personal stories in a way that still kind of safeguard myself. But yeah, it's interesting to see the duality, because they are both me, but one of them, the Stephanie that you see at Trans Pride, is more me than the Stephanie that you see on the internet. But I think that that can be said for a lot of people who have any sort of profile on the internet.
Yeah, for sure. Like, you know, my husband jokes that I have an event voice, for example,
Yes,
like that's a bit
we
louder.
both do.
Yeah, yeah, yes, we're seeing each other in action. But you know, but those two things again, you're right. It's the word is duality, right?
Yeah,
They're not. It's not a false side. It's a
no,
different side. It's playing to an audience, which we need
yeah,
to do. You know, you need to get engagement and stuff on these things. So yeah, I
yeah,
mean, I think that this podcast is probably more me than you'll possibly see when I'm hosting an event, for example. So yeah, no, I
yeah.
love that, and I think duality is a nail on the head. I'd love to know about someone who has inspired you the most along your journey.
Um, That's a really interesting question. And I think that, you know, growing up, a lot of my kind of, I guess, my inspiration for my transition were like cis queer women icons who, you know, not to just be like a really basic, you know, white gay trapped in the body of a hot trans woman, but people like, you know, Dolly Parton and Cher were everything, because they were just drag queens. They were just women who were drag queens.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I found a lot of inspiration in the world of fantasy. You know, I was a very kind of siloed child before I came out in my transition. And so I found a lot of inspiration in the world of, you know, fantasy, not only literature and gaming, but also in fashion, and the way that people, you know, carried themselves and created art that could be worn in your everyday life. But not to put too kind of fine a point on it, I think right now the person who inspires me the most would be one of my colleagues at Trans. So he works at Trans Plus and CCGS, but my colleague is called Jason Potts. You might know him.
Don't know. I don't know, but I know the name.
Yeah, and he inspires me every day because he shows up for the community in really quiet ways. And I think that he's someone that really helped me find my footing within my role as he's a trans man. And he really helped kind of nurture not only my empathy towards my patients and that sort of pathway, but also he really cemented my validity in terms of moving into the healthcare sector and really showing up for my community in non-flashy ways, showing up for my community in the everyday way, you know, because Trans Pride is amazing, but it's a really flashy day where people are posting everything online and you get to speak on, you know, but we show up for trans people every day. And so meeting him over the last kind of 2 years, he, to me, really embodies what it is like to be an advocate every day, and not just on social media, and not just, yeah. So yeah, he's someone who really inspires me at the moment.
I love that. So big up Dolly and Cher, but bigger up for
Jason.
Jason. For Jason.
Yeah.
And I do 100% agree. I think that, you know, when we're in these spaces, you know, where the many different hats that we all wear. For me, the podcast, Sober Age Trans History Week, always platforming trans voices. But actually, that's so top service in terms of
Yeah.
the way I show up, and I imagine yourself as well. Sometimes with allyship and advocacy, it's the quietly sitting back and observing, how can I do this better? What can I take from this example of
Yeah.
shining best practice?
Yeah, exactly. And seeing and interacting with trans people every day in a way that people are never going to know about.
Yeah,
Supporting them every day in a way that's never going to be shouted about.
yeah.
Supporting them every day in a way that's never going to, you know, it's never going to be news articles on the Independent. It's never going to be, you know, it's just showing up for them in a really kind of, this will benefit them as an individual, but not my community as a whole. And then by doing that, actually that work massively benefits the community, because these people it all just, it's a domino effect. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think anyone who is showing up in allyship or lived experience, but in the small ways every day of, you know, people who are going through and helping people with passport applications or name changes or through their surgery, or your nurse at your gender identity clinic, or the parents that are coming to Pride for their trans child, you know, that's the everyday allyship. That's the quiet allyship. That's the quiet advocacy that is really making a huge difference.
Yeah, it's so important, but not talked about enough.
Yeah.
My final question for this segment before we move on is, looking back so far, what are you most proud of to date?
I finished my entire transition at 22, so that is a huge, and I am very privileged to say that, but I did still spend 10 years of my life transitioning, which I think people think because I finished my transition young that I had it easy, but I still transitioned through very challenging circumstances. Opening and helping to facilitate the opening of Queer Britain will always be, for me. I mean, for listeners who don't know, me and the lovely Neil, we met when we were helping to open Queer Britain, the UK's first LGBTQ plus museum, and that is how we kind of came into each other's orbits, and we really made history in a big way there. So I think that will always be a point of pride for me in my journey. But I think the thing I'm proudest of running the world's largest trans pride aside is that I've come to really love an identity that caused me so much anxiety for such a long time. I think that my biggest achievement is finding a way to exist that I'm so genuinely proud of, that I embody, you know, because there's that trope of like, being trans isn't all I am, but being trans is, you know, I've made it my hobbies, my identity, my work, my public facing profile. Like, there's not an element of my life that isn't touched by my transness. And I think that that's actually really quite beautiful.
The House of Happiness is London's ultimate sober clubbing extravaganza. We're led and delivered but created for all, whether teetotal, sober curious, or just taking a booze snooze. We love a day rave, and on a Saturday afternoon you can expect banging house tunes, DJs on decks, dancers on podiums, and a fully stocked alcohol-free bar. Flamboyant, bold, with a glitter station to boot. We're all about safe, inclusive fun, and we even have a pre-meet so that you can make new sober buddies before you hit the dance floor. Grab your tickets from Instagram now at House of Happiness Official, and we'll see you on the dance floor. Are you ready for some quickfire questions?
I'm not very good at this because I'm not a super succinct talker, but let's go for it.
Here we go. What album, book, or movie has had a lasting impact on you?
2017's Rainbow by Kesha.
What an album! What an underrated album as well. What is it about you? What is it about it you love so much?
The reason I love that album is because it came out when I was outed at university. I became the victim of physical, sexual, and verbal assault on my campus, and it came out at a time where she was dealing very publicly with some of those things. And I just found it very empowering that someone who had had the expectation of being a one-hit wonder or like a very shallow pop star came out with something so deep and meaningful. And that album to me really came at a time where I really needed it.
Yeah, and she's phenomenal, right?
And I think people don't realise that Kesha is not like Kesha Rose Sherbet. I always get to call her Sherbet. She's a phenomenal songwriter, and her mother is also a phenomenal songwriter and has written for everyone from, you know, Dolly Parton to Beyonce to Britney Spears, like all of these, you know. Kesha's amazing, and I don't think she gets enough credit because there's still this perception and projection on her that she's the girl that sang TikTok.
Yeah, which is a great tune for an opening tune, but so many hits afterwards. Like, I love some of the weirder Kesha stuff as well. I saw her at Mighty Hoopla, front row, and also, are you seeing her at Brixton Academy next year?
So I'm not, but now I might.
Okay, right.
I might see if I can.
Yes, let's touch base. Let's make that happen.
Maybe we'll touch base. Yeah.
What's a saying you live by and one that you'd put in the bin?
Saying I live by my lovely mother, who is also called Lynnette. That's where the Lynnette comes from, and Stephanie Lynnette. Chuck it in the fuck it bucket and move on. And it's her being a very Cornish maid, me old ma, and just saying, you can't change the past. Chuck it in the fuck it bucket and just step towards the light and move forwards. So I take that with me every day. And as soon as I've done something, try not to dwell on it. A phrase that we can do without. It recently came up in a Keira Knightley interview, this idea that we need to, we're all going to have to learn to get along with each other. And actually, I think that's bullshit. I think that excuses so much prejudice. And actually, I don't think there's anything wrong with calling out oppression every single day. And I think that this idea of like, we just have to learn to coexist exonerates the people on the side of like doing the oppression by being like, oh, well, it's just my opinion. And I want people to know, freedom of speech. And I'm like, freedom of speech is not free if it comes at the cost of someone's safety. Freedom of speech does not excuse hate speech. And if your speech is costing someone anything else, it is not free speech. And I think moving away from those two phrases, if we just have to learn to exist and it's freedom of speech, it's like, no.
Yeah, there was several things. I'm so glad you brought this up. There was when she finished it off, she said, we're all going to have to learn to respect each other. And I was thinking, firstly, where's the fucking respect for the trans community, right, in all of this? But also, the little laugh was so infuriating, so offensive and dismissive. But would you say, ignorant or misinformed, dumb or bullshit?
So I'm just going to do my best impression. Just give me a... No, I was not aware of that. Because it literally, it's willful ignorance, because that because these people are not siloed people. They have managers and PR and press and stylists, and like they have all of these sycophantic people surrounding them who would have made them absolutely, because going through, I mean, we both know this working in events, a talent contract.
Yes, I was just thinking that.
Process from initial meetings to going back and forth on contract budgets, to going back and forth on payments, to going back and forth on promotion obligation and PR, it's a long process. And I can guarantee you, before that announcement was made, multiple conversations has had. I would have found it more respectful for her to just turn around and be like, do you know what? I just wanted the cash. And I'd be like, you know what, that's much more. But I think it is willful ignorance. And I think that it is hilarious to me that her job is to be an actress and she couldn't even convincingly lie to us in an interview.
Yeah. And you could really tell that she thought that statement was a serve.
She thought it was a serve. Yeah. She thought she had just been Mother Teresa, like, we're just all going to have to learn to get along. And it's hilarious because her entire career has been built on the back of the LGBTQ plus community, because she became a queer icon in Bend It Like Beckham when she was like 17.
Yeah. Such a shame. It just it annoys me that so many of these actors, singers that we describe, not that I'm calling Keira Knightley a gay icon whatsoever, but I know she was in the context of that. But people that get platformed at Pride events, people that get platformed within our community and respected, so many of them can't hold that up because they're not part of our community.
Yeah, this is it. And I think it's,
we're rubbish at quickfire, by the way.
we're to all of our listeners, I do apologize.
I don't.
But yeah, I find it hysterical that, like, I would genuinely find it so much more genuine and on the nose for these amazing people who have signed up to, who we've loved and watched on our screen, especially in Britain, because they're all kind of British icons of stage and screen. If these people would just come forward and say, like, do you know what? I heard about the rhetoric, but I wanted the money. I heard about the rhetoric, but I wanted the opportunity. Yeah. And it's damaging to the trans community, of course, but at least it's honest.
Yeah.
At least it's not willful ignorance at the expense of oppression.
Yeah. No, very icky. Get in the bin, Keira. And that sentiment, exactly. Best adventure of your life so far?
Moving to London changed my entire life. That was definitely one of them. But taking on the event manager role at London Trans Pride has been the adventure of a lifetime. And it is one that I have you know, it is a hard job. It is hard to be the events and project manager for London Trans Pride. It is hard to help, you know, I work alongside an amazing team of people, but even to help
Gorgeous
in
team
a
of
small
people.
way, gorgeous team of people. Shout out to everyone at London Trans Pride. But it is a hard thing to do that job, and it is such an adventure, and I love it. So yeah, I'd say that has been the adventure of a lifetime so far.
And over 100,000 people attended. Like
Yeah.
it was phenomenal. It was phenomenal.
I think it was, you know, it was so funny because the Metropolitan Police, who unfortunately have to be a presence at all kind of protest events, they were speaking to us and they were like, oh, you know, we don't know how big you are, but you're coming into Parliament Square and we still have Haymarket closed, which means that like we're well over kind of half a mile expanse of London just like filled with, and it was just amazing to be able to facilitate the ultimate safe space, because now that we're the world's largest, and we have been for 2 years now, we really have cemented ourselves as we are the ultimate kind of safe space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really does feel so. It's such a special event. Like, big up to you and the team. You're phenomenal. My little question that it makes up the title of this episode is: what three words would you use to describe you and your origin story?
Varied, loud, tenacious.
Very loud and tenacious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
and owning all of those. Let's fast forward a little bit. What exciting things do you have coming up?
I mean, exciting things for me at the moment are just, you know, not only my everyday work within healthcare and also kind of Trans Awareness Week, but then gearing up for London Trans Plus Pride 2026, and
Yeah.
then hopefully platforming myself more towards the idea of body positivity in a real way across my social medias and across my kind of internet content. I'm going to be taking part in a photo shoot for like a size inclusive footwear company, which is going to be great. So little things, nothing big and flashy because London Trans Pride is part million, but little things that I'll be showing up for over the next year, and then hopefully some bigger things into 2026.
I'm here for all of them. What brings you joy?
My community. I think I think in such challenging and turbulent times as queer people and the intersectionality of being, you know, queer identifying, in light of everything that's going on, my joy comes from my community and the very privileged position I have in terms of being a community leader. It's so joyful to see organisations like the Trans Solidarity Alliance or the Goodwill Project or Trans Kids Deserve Better showing up for our community in ways that really get conversations going. And I think that looking out to those individual groups and looking out into those community focused groups and working with colleagues every day like Jason, who, you know, are showing up for the community every day, I think my community just gives me so much joy.
Yeah. And what about later? What about the rest of life? What little things bring you joy?
Do you know, there's this like, I live quite close to Hyde Park, so I love walking through Hyde Park. That's a joy. I'm a video gamer. That's a
Yes,
joy.
you
I'm a
said.
collector of toys, so that's you know, it brings me. But yeah, I found real joy in kind of waking up every day and just seeing the world for what it is, but then choosing to put on my rose tinted glasses of trying to see the positive in the everyday,
Yeah,
which is really challenging right now and is really
for
challenging,
sure.
I'm sure, for lots of listeners and for you. But I think that the thing that's bringing me joy every day is waking up and really reflecting on the journey and then choosing to try and see the world in a positive light.
Yeah, because if I always talk about this, and particularly within the realms of DEI, which I am working in now, is that if you don't see the joy in other people, in gratitude, in all those things, it's
Yeah.
really freaking hard to fight the big stuff.
If you don't laugh, you'd cry.
Yeah,
And I think that we're two people who choose to laugh.
absolutely, constantly. And you have to turn up the pink in those rose tinted glasses sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's like, right, there's something. Yeah.
They're like opaque pink at certain points of the day. Yeah.
We both love pink, so it's all good.
Well, yeah,
My final question for you, Steph, I can't believe how fast this has gone, is do you have any words of encouragement or wisdom for anyone out there to help them get to wherever they're going?
Don't shrink yourself to other people's expectations. Don't allow other people to project that onto you. And remember that to be palatable might be safer, might feel like the right decision in the moment, but it's probably the furthest away from being an authentic version of yourself. So just wake up every day and choose to take up space if you can.
Steph, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It has been gorgeous. Let's do this again soon.
Yes.
And yeah, can't wait to see what's next for you. Best of luck continuing to flourish, as you said, in the new role. I love to see it. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. Oh, and congratulations on your Trans Ally of the Year award nomination at the Trans in the City Awards.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It means
Very well
yeah, it means the world. Thank you so much. And yeah, let's catch up soon.
Yes, let's do it.
I'm so grateful that I got to have this conversation with Stephanie and spend over an hour with her talking all things life and her origin story as well. There were some standout moments for this from me. We hear a lot of rhetoric these days around the trans plus community and particularly around children and not knowing who they are and they're too young to decide. And I think when we think about Stephanie's story, which started, just before the day before her 13th birthday and before that, but the moment that she decided that she would be Stephanie, is that children they do know who they are. As queer people, we know that we're different, but Stephanie, at such a young age, in order to be taken seriously, had to hit the ground running 110%, as she said, for people to take her seriously, and how that has produced this confident, self-assured person that we see, know, and love now, and how that can kind of translate in ways such as Stephanie's polishness, where she knows that in order to be taken seriously, she needs to come across a certain way. But I love how she's able to lean into her authenticity as well. I think that's really important. And yeah, those two things can exist at once, right? Our customer facing image and personas that we present can sit alongside the more relaxed, more fun and goofy side, and the more relaxed side of who we are. Palatability. I love the topic of palatability. Is something that I have often considered, particularly when it comes to queerness, transness, blackness, disability, and not making other people feel uncomfortable. And I love that Steph is emboldened to go into the direction of body positivity, and particularly taking up space. Stephanie, as she says, she's a big person. She's very tall, and she can't help that. And actually, why should she shrink herself, and why should we shrink ourselves? That line that she said, where confidence is a choice, not an emotion. You have to wake up every day and say, I exist out of the social norms, and I'm going to do that boldly, loudly, empathetically. As I said, Steph really, really was on fire during this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. Please do like, subscribe, share, comment. Get this story out. Get all the stories and these episodes out there. These stories deserve to be heard. Stay tuned for more amazing guests on Pause and Rewind. I've only got 2 episodes left of this season before I wrap up until next year. So stay tuned and see you soon. Cheers.